breaths away, raised his lance and waved his shield, as a signal to Yusuf and his brother to move aside and get out of their way. They complied at once, and the next moment the 2 Templar knights thundered past as they let their mantles fall, which fluttered to the dust behind them. Yusuf quickly issued an order to his companions. With difficulty, their horses' hooves slipping, they clambered up the steep slope of the wadi until they reached a spot from which they had a good view. There Yusuf turned his horse around and stopped, for he wished to understand what God meant by all of this. The 2 others wanted to take advantage of the opportunity and escape, while the Templar knights and bandits settled matters as they saw fit. But Yusuf rejected all such arguments with a curt gesture of annoyance, because he truly wanted to see what would happen next. He had never in all his life been this close to a Templar knight, those demons of evil, and he felt strongly, as if God's voice were advising him, that he had to see what was going to happen. Mere common sense would not stop him. Common sense dictated that they should continue their ride toward Al-Arish for as long as the light permitted, but what he now saw he would never forget. The 6 bandits had few choices once they discovered that instead of chasing 3 wealthy men, they were now facing 2 Templar knights, lance to lance. The wadi was much too narrow for them to be able to stop, turn around, and beat a retreat before the Franks were upon them. After a brief hesitation, they did the only thing they could do. They grouped themselves so they were riding 2 by 2, and spurred their horses so as not to be killed by standing still. The white-clad Templar knight who rode in front of his sergeant first feigned an attack to the right of the first 2 bandits, and when they held up their shields to counter the dreaded blow of his lance, Yusuf wondered whether the bandits understood what now awaited them. The Templar knight spun his horse around with a swift movement that shouldn't have been possible in such tight quarters. This gave him a whole new vantage point, and he thrust his lance right between the shield and body of the bandit on the left. At the same time he released his lance so as not to be wrenched out of his saddle. Just at that moment the sergeant came in contact with the astonished bandit on the right, who was huddled behind his shield, waiting for the blow that never came, and who now looked up only to see the other foe's lance coming toward his face from the wrong direction. The white-clad man with the loathsome red cross now faced the next 2 enemies in a passageway so narrow that there was barely room for 3 horses abreast. He had drawn his sword, and at first it looked as if he intended to attack head-on, which would have been unwise with a weapon on only one side. But suddenly he turned his handsome steed sideways, a roan at the height of its powers, and lashed out behind him, striking one of the bandits and toppling him out of the saddle. The second bandit then saw a good opportunity, since the enemy was approaching him sideways, almost backward, with his sword in the wrong hand and out of reach. What he did not notice was that the Templar knight had dropped his shield and switched his sword to his left hand. When the bandit leaned forward in the saddle to strike with his sabre, he exposed his whole neck and head to the blow, which now came from the opposite direction. If the head can retain a thought at the moment of death, if only for a brief breath, then that was a very surprised head that fell to the ground, said Fakhra in amazement. He, too, was now captivated by the drama and wanted to see more. The last 2 bandits had exploited the moment of decreased speed that had befallen the white-clad Templar knight as he dispatched the other bandit. They had turned their horses around and were now fleeing down the wadi. At that moment the black-clad sergeant reached the godless dog who had been knocked to the ground by the Templar knight's horse. The sergeant dismounted, calmly grabbed the reins of the bandit's horse with one hand, and with the other used his sword to stab the dazed, reeling, and no doubt bruised bandit in the throat at the spot where his